The Essenes. Essenes and Pharisees both trace their roots to the orthodox leaders of Maccabean times who stood their ground against Hellenism. Pharisees maintained a strict orthodoxy within the framework of historical Judaism. They maintained their separation from defilement, but not from the Jewish community itself. Even though the temple worship was conducted by Sadducees, the Pharisees esteemed it a basic part of their religious inheritance. While the Pharisee might hold himself aloof from sinners, he lived among them and coveted their esteem. A more extreme reaction against the influences which tended to corrupt Jewish life was taken by a sect which the ancient writers Philo, Josephus, and Pliny call the Essenes. They seem to have lived for the most part in monastic communities such as the one which maintained headquarters at Qumran, near the northwest corner of the Dead Sea. In seeking to explain Judaism to the Greek-speaking world, Josephus spoke of three philosophies: those of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the Essenes. The term Essenes seems to have had quite an elastic usage, including various groups of monastically minded Jews who varied among themselves in certain of their practices. Pliny says that the Essenes avoided women and did not marry, but Josephus speaks of an order of marrying Essenes. The excavations at Qumran indicate that women were enrolled in the Qumran community. Ancient writers speak favorably of the Essenes, who lived a life of rigor and simplicity. Members of the community studied scripture and other religious books. Each Essene was required to perform manual labor in order to make the community self-supporting. Community of goods was practiced, and strict discipline was enforced by an overseer. Those groups which renounced marriage adopted boys at an early age in order to inculcate and perpetuate the ideals of Essenism. Slavery and war were repudiated. The Essenes welcomed proselytes, but the novice was required to undergo a period of strict probation before he could become a full-fledged member. Numerically, the Essenes were never large. Philo says that there were 4,000 of them, and Pliny speaks of a community north of En-Gedi, corresponding to the Qumran area. That there were other settlements is clear, for we are told that all members of the sect were welcome in any of the Essene colonies. Nothing certain is known of the early history of the sect for, like all reform movements, it its origins back to remote times. Philo states that Moses instituted the order, and Josephus says that they existed ever since the ancient times of the fathers. It is certain that the Essene movement was at one time an extreme protest against the corruptions which were apparent in pre-Christian Judaism, and that ultimately many members withdrew from the Palestinian community life and sought spiritual purification in places such as the Qumran area. Regarding themselves as the only true, or pure Israel, the Essenes refused to cooperate with what they believed to be the corrupt religious observances at the Jerusalem temple. They carefully regulated life at the Essene center seems to have served as a substitute for the temple in the eyes of pious Essenes. The strictness of Essene discipline and the rigidity with which the law was enforced are stressed by all who write about them. Josephus says that they were stricter than all Jews in abstaining from work on the Sabbath day. A passage in the Damascus document, which seems to be Essene in origin, says that it is unlawful to lift an animal from a pit on the Sabbath day. Such a view was considered extreme even by legalistic Pharisees. The absence of Essenes from the mainstreams of Jewish life doubtless accounts for the fact that they are not mentioned in the New Testament or in the Jewish Talmud. Although the high morality of the Essenes is indeed commendable, the teaching and practice of Jesus was diametrically opposite to the legalism and asceticism of the Essene teaching. Although the Essenes considered that contact with a member of their own group of a lower order was ceremonially defiling, Jesus did not hesitate to eat and drink with publicans and sinners. Although obedient to the Mosaic law, Jesus had no sympathy with those who made of the law a burden instead of a blessing. The Sabbath, according to Jesus, was made for man, and it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath day. Jesus denounced abuses in the temple and prophesied its destruction, but he did not repudiate the temple services. He came to Jerusalem for the great Jewish feasts, and after his resurrection, disciples still made their way to the temple at the hour of prayer. While asceticism and monasticism early gained a foothold in Christian thinking, Christianity in its earliest period was in no sense an ascetic movement. The ministry of Jesus was largely to the common people who were rejected by Pharisee and Essene alike. Jesus was not ashamed to so associate with the people of his generation that the self-righteous called him a wine bibber, a friend of publicans and sinners.